Well, the calendar says the end of April, but the legislature is still in session. Extra innings for this year. And we're joined right now by our two House representatives for the 12th Legislative District, Condotta and Mike Steele. Thanks for joining us, gentlemen.
You bet, Steve. Good to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Nice to have you home, but I'm sure you'd prefer that you had your work done by now, right?
Yeah, it would be nice to not be on call. We're just getting settled back in, but I'm afraid that won't be for very long.
Well, let's talk about this session. First of all, it's a mix of success, I guess, and failures. And right now, the big failure is not being able to get a budget in a timely fashion. Yeah. And this seems to be, the trend these days, isn't it, Kerry?
Well, we've seen that in the last several long sessions. The long sessions have ended up being 6 months instead of 105 days, and this looking like it's going that way again. So I'll let Mike speak to his first long session.
Yeah, Mike.
You know, it's been an incredible session, very educational, as I mentioned earlier to you. But
this is your first term.
My first term, and I can tell you, the frustration as we leave the Capitol after 105 days of hard work is really, we should have been done. We should have accomplished what we were sent there to do in 105 days. And the fact that we didn't is very frustrating to a lot of us that are in the legislature, and especially our citizens back here at home who wanted us to be done and sent us there to do the job.
Okay, so what are you hearing right now from at least the Republican caucus right now in terms of the negotiations that are ongoing?
Well, there isn't much going on in the budget, Steve. It's still in a stall mode, and but the education folks are meeting all week, and they're trying to get that education plan put together. That is one of the two big pieces we have to solve. We have to finish the education piece and then put it in the budget. But the budget talks are stalled because the Democrats refuse to vote for the tax package, and if the tax package isn't voted on, then it's not on the table. And that is the right way. That's the fair way to play it. So we just have to see if that stalemate continues.
Mm-hmm. I would agree. I've told everybody back here at home that really there's three things keeping us in Olympia. It's the $8.2 billion in new revenue over the next 4 years that we can't agree on. It's the fact that the governor did not start negotiating until day 103. And it's the fact that we do not have a solution to the McCleary decision. Those are the three things really that are the holdup. And from what we're hearing and what we continue to discuss as a caucus, is we're not getting very close to a solution because of that major revenue piece that, as Representative Condotta mentioned, they're refusing to take a vote on.
Okay, so right now we're just kind of hung up right now procedurally, and getting those talks going is going to be a major undertaking at this point. Well, let's go ahead.
I was just saying, well, let's just hope that the education group puts something together. I think that would be a big step forward. If they fail this week to come to some kind of a conclusion on that, then I start really getting worried.
In the meantime, the Supreme Court ruling, of course, that is the McCleary decision, is really the driving force in this budget right now. And finding an adequate way to fund basic education seems to be the real linchpin, I guess, isn't it?
Well, it depends on what you define as basic. They still haven't really gotten that tightened up. And then there's the major force of the WEA, the teachers union, which is pushing for much higher wages than probably what the courts would need. Mike did most of the work on education.
Yeah, I serve on the Education Committee, and the ranking and the chair are back there in negotiations with the other corners of the legislature trying to resolve this. But I will tell you, we've made drastic steps forward, incredible investment in education. Nearly 40% of the overall total budget in the state is being directed toward education, with 42% maybe over the next 2 bienniums. So it's incredibly amount of money we're talking about when we're talking about the billions of dollars that are going to education, and still we don't have a solution. And
remember, there's two pieces to this. It's adequate funding, fair funding. That's the other thing, is making sure it's equivalent. But more importantly is who pays that funding. The state does their portion. The point the court's made is we're relying too much on local levies. So in some form, that's what these people are meeting to discuss. How do you reduce the local levies? How do you backfill it with state money? And how do you do that equitably across the board? That is the puzzle that has to be solved. And that's not an easy puzzle. It's been worked on for years, and it seems that we have the money necessary to do what we need to do, but how do we fund it? How do we put it on the table? And that is the big problem.
Okay. But as far as legislation is concerned in this session, would you like to comment on any of the bills that you sponsored? I know that there was a tourism bill that I guess is still hanging out there, isn't it, in terms of the budget?
Yeah, we both worked on that, and it's a great bill. It's very well accepted. The problem is finding money for it. It's just not a high priority. The education thing is sucking all the air out of the room. So there's a lot of good little pieces of legislation that could do wonderful things that are not being funded because of this McCleary situation.
And I would just mention that as we go back into this special session, the rules change. We basically hit a reset button for all the legislation that we potentially killed in effort to keep things under the rug, or legislation that was good. As Carrie mentioned, the tourism bill could potentially be back to life because all things are back to the House of Origin. And so we can pull those things back for votes, which is likely what we'll be doing on Tuesday when we're back on the floor. We won't be voting on budget on Tuesday, but we'll be voting on other bills that the Speaker or the Senate need to progress forward in negotiations. So it'll be interesting to see how that all unfolds.
Well, you guys are obviously earning your money. Let's talk about, there was another piece of, well, actually part of the budget, the transportation budget, as I understand. We did succeed in getting some money for the new Goodwin Bridge, Goodwin Street Bridge there in Kashmir.
Yeah, that was great. Really great effort by both the Senate and the House to make sure that that was funded. Both Representative Condotta and I made sure that the chair was aware of our desires to see that funded in our budget in the House, and she was gracious to accept those things. We actually have nearly $15.6 million worth of transportation projects coming back to the 12th district. That's a big win. And I believe both of us supported the transportation budget. No new revenues in that budget. There were things we didn't like about it and things that we still don't like about it, but that's the thing with legislation. You have to come to a compromise and find a solution that's going to meet the needs of your district, while potentially defending things that you don't like. And that's what we did, and we're happy to see that $2 million come back to Kashmir.
It's a part of the process.
Part of the process.
Well, it's a tough vote. It was a tough vote for me because there are things in that package I really dislike, and the voters here dislike, like vehicle miles traveled.
Yeah.
They're studying that. People don't really like that idea, and I don't blame them. And there's some backfill money for the tunnel in Seattle, which we were told we would never have to pay for, and certainly enough, the state is ending up paying some of the backfill. So, but on the other hand, we all got the amendments we wanted. And we got a package that really does help the 12th district. So we'll just keep fighting the VMT and the other issues down the road.
I know that there are some issues that are out there. In fact, when we're talking about the education funding and McCleary decision, I know you and I were talking here earlier in the week about maybe something that's looming in the future in terms of county funding.
Well, yeah, I think the next big...
Is that the next McCleary?
I think it is. Our counties are getting to a point where they're really stretched thin, and cities keep expanding and encroaching into the tax base, and so the counties have a very limited amount of taxing authority. They just basically have property tax and sales tax, where cities have B&O and other taxes. And I think you could give a perfect example of Chelan versus Chelan County. Chelan City's doing well, and the county is struggling a bit.
But there are also constitutional implications here
Yes.
too, aren't there?
Yeah.
Well, the interesting thing about this, as someone who came from local government, serving on city council for 6 years in Chelan, is we now sitting on the other side of the fence, really, where the legislature is forcing all of these mandates down to the counties and the cities. You see why we're basically strapping the counties for cash. We tell them to do all these things and make this happen, and then don't supply funding to go along with it. So I think that's, as Carrie was mentioning, that's the McCleary piece.
The proverbial unfunded mandates.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and they're getting to a point where especially some of the smaller counties are just about bankrupt. They just can't continue. And so we're looking at some structural changes and some revenue sharing, or possibly moving the tax structure around a little bit to favor the counties a bit more, because they do things, criminal justice and indigent defense and those kind of things, that they just don't get paid for.
And
Well, I
frankly,
know-
are very expensive.
Yes.
Speaking with the Chelan County Commissioners, especially when you're talking about marijuana revenue, and really we're on the short stick in terms of getting revenue share from the state.
Oh, yeah, and everything, the alcohol, cannabis, whatever you talk about, the state is just stingy. I mean, the folks up there want to spend every single dime on state. They don't want to help the counties. If anything, they're going the other way.
And we did work hard this session to pass a bill that would allow additional revenues to come back to these counties from the cannabis sales. So, I mean, the efforts are there, and people are, and certainly Representative Condotta is making a huge effort to, push those things back down to the counties. But it's a struggle, as he said. It's a war over where the money goes and what our communities need locally versus what the state wants to spend.
And remember, the counties are an agency of the state. That's what most people understand. Cities are not. Counties are an agency of the state and should be funded by the state. And I think they have a case like McCleary, that if they got together, and I think they're thinking about it, and filed a lawsuit, that they could very well collect from the state some more money. So that's coming. That's next. So as if we didn't have another issue to deal with, but McCleary first.
I know it's a big issue with WASAC
Yeah.
as well, the Washington Association of Counties. So yeah, definitely that's a looming issue that we're going to be dealing with in the future. Gentlemen, anything else you'd like to share with us on the session? Or, by the way, congratulations up in Chelan. Going to finally get your new hospital, Mike.
Yes, I was very excited to be part of the celebration last night, and we're really pleased with the efforts that the whole of the community made. It looks like it's going to be a resounding passage, so obviously overwhelming support in the Chelan community for that hospital. And again, appreciate all the work that all the committee did and all that the community did to make that happen. But I think just in final thoughts from the legislative side of things, we're still in this. We've got, looks like a long fight ahead of us as far as special sessions are concerned. And it's nice to be home for a little while to try and recharge, but we head back immediately on Sunday to do more work and to pass some bills. So
I'll give you the last word, Representative Condotta.
Thanks, Steve. Well, it's great to be here. I'll tell you, this is getting old. I just can't see that we're becoming a full-time legislature is what's happening. That's just not necessary. If everybody played by the rules, we wouldn't be there. And I'm real concerned about this one because, again, we push this budget ends on July 1st. If we don't have a budget done, it creates all kinds of downline problems for counties, for everybody, for schools. And so this has to get solved, and somebody's got to force people to the table. And I'm just not sure when that's going to happen. But from my standpoint, I'm on appropriations, I'm on finance, I'm in the middle of the budget. I'll be there. I'll be there as much as I need to be, and we'll push as hard as we can.
Politics. I think we're just a microcosm of what we're seeing in Congress right now. The Democrats and the Republicans just cannot come together.
Kind of unfortunate. We're not nearly as bad, are we, as
No,
DC? I mean, we got along during the session. We worked.
it's very collaborative, actually.
Yeah.
But you get to these points in the process where you have to stand up for what you think your constituents really want. And we know our constituents can't handle $8.2 billion more in taxes. And they don't want it. They made it very clear they don't want any new taxes coming their way. So it's our job to stand up and say we have to vote in favor of our constituents.
Especially small business. The small business guys cannot take more hits. They've got minimum wage, they got paid sick leave, now they're facing a possible family paid leave system. They can't take the hit, so we've got to defend those guys. And we don't need it. We're at $43 billion, Steve. We have enough money to run this place, so we got work to do.
Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you for joining us here on NCW Life with a recap of the legislative session, and of course, good luck going forward, and hopefully we can get a budget in the not too distant future here.
I think we agree.
Yes, we hope so.
Thanks, Steve.
Okay,
Thank you.
again, I'm Steve Hare, NCW Life News.